Although the biggest movies these days seem to be making more money than most small countries, that doesn't mean everyone is sharing in the wealth. Sadly, quite a few 2019 movies, some with big names and big budgets, have already been given the thumbs down from critics and audiences alike. Here's why these 2019 films bombed at the box office. Replicas is one of those science fiction horror movies that seems to exist solely to warn the world's mad scientists that dead people are supposed to stay that way. Keanu Reeves plays Will Foster, a scientist working on transferring the consciousnesses of the dead into new bodies. After his wife and children are killed during a boating trip, he enlists the help of a fellow scientist to resurrect them via cloning. Predictably, things go wrong. Replicas performed dismally at the box office, grossing just a little over $4 million, and its aggregate Rotten Tomatoes score doesn't suggest this was an underhyped gem either. Critics ripped the sci-fi thriller to pieces, calling out its preposterous story, its numerous plot holes, and the squandering of its novel potential. A number of critics have suggested that Reeves was horribly miscast as a grieving genius, and more than one argued that Nicolas Cage would have made a much better fit. Amidst the storm of unkind reviews of Replicas, perhaps the best takedown of them all came from the Los Angeles Times, which explained, "The filmmakers managed to avoid every potentially interesting choice for far dumber and far more inexplicable conclusions." Don't worry, Joss Whedon fans, you haven't missed anything important. 2019 Serenity is a very different beast indeed than the 2005 sci-fi cult classic.
I'm a leaf on the wind. Watch how I soar.
No, this movie follows Baker Dill, the captain of a fishing vessel who is dragged back into his ex-wife Karen's life when she tries to hire him to kill her current husband. So far, so straightforward, right? Well, guess again, because it is eventually revealed that Dill is actually a character in a video game designed by a boy named Patrick. When Patrick's real-life mother remarried an abusive man, he redesigned his game to be about destroying the new man in her life. Some critics praised a number of fine performances that nevertheless failed to save an absurd story. Most critics, however, agreed that Serenity's script was horribly written, and its premise was downright ludicrous. The biggest problem seems to have been the film's poorly executed reveals, which the Sunday Times called shoddy narrative gimmicks. Rather than adding depth or fresh perspective to the story, reviewers felt the twists were self-indulgent, while the Arts Desk wrote, "It's as if you've been watching a movie that wasn't that great to begin with, and then the director crashes through the screen, doubling up with laughter and telling you you've been had." Louis Ashbourne Serkis plays a young boy in present-day England who stumbles upon the legendary sword Excalibur in 2019's family-friendly fantasy The Kid Who Would Be King. Unfortunately for Alex and his friends, King Arthur's old enemy Morgana knows Excalibur has been discovered and wants it for herself. Aided by the backwards-aging Merlin, Alex and his friends embark on a quest to defeat the dastardly sorceress. Sadly, their victory against the forces of evil couldn't save the movie from grossing just a little over half of its production budget of $59 million. Unlike most of the films that flopped in 2019, The Kid Who Would Be King enjoyed mostly favorable reviews, earning an impressive 90% score on Rotten Tomatoes. While writing about the film's inability to turn a profit, Forbes placed part of the blame on competing intellectual properties, pointing out that Kid was forced to face off with films like Aquaman and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. These movies featured characters audiences were familiar with and wanted to see on the big screen, whereas audiences simply struggled to care about King Arthur and his friends. For a long time to come, the thing most people may remember about the darkly comic revenge thriller Cold Pursuit will be the interview star Liam Neeson gave while promoting the film. During this interview, Neeson revealed that, in the wake of the sexual assault of a close friend by a black man, he had once walked the streets hoping any black man would start a fight with him so that Neeson could kill him in retaliation.
It was horrible when I think back, but I did that, and I've never admitted that to it. I'm saying it to a journalist, God forbid.
The interview sparked a firestorm of controversy, eventually prompting an apology from the actor. Cold Pursuit's opening weekend pulled in $10.8 million, the lowest number for a Neeson movie debut since 2010's The Next 3 Days. Eventually, however, subsequent grosses helped the film break even with its $60 million budget. It's impossible to know how much of that poor performance was influenced by the response to Neeson's colossal public blunder, though according to some critics, there was plenty in Cold Pursuit to dislike even if you never heard his notorious interview. Whether it was Neeson's interview or the film itself that led to Cold Pursuit's chilly reception, it's probably safe to say that it'll be a while before Neeson is allowed to veer off topic during a press interview. In the world of Captive State, 2019 is the year aliens invade the Earth, ultimately leading to humanity's capitulation to the extraterrestrials who rule the planet from their underground closed zones. A decade later, two brothers join a resistance force against the aliens and find themselves hunted by a shadowy police commander who has dedicated himself to ending the resistance once and for all, or so it seems.
I think that it was
that I'm gonna watch it later.
Oh, you
have the DVR.
I got it.
Start. Okay.
Mom's a word.
Captive State eventually grossed an unimpressive $8.6 million worldwide. Overall, the movie's reviews agreed that the plot was convoluted and that the film didn't have the budget it needed to tell its story. Meanwhile, others felt the focus on the unwieldy plot sacrificed believable characters. Real Views reviewer wrote, "Characterization is perfunctory and unsatisfactory. We're watching a bunch of pawns on a filmmaker's chessboard." A remake of a 2011 Spanish film with the same name, 2019's Miss Bala stars Gina Rodriguez of Jane the Virgin fame. The film brings Rodriguez to unfamiliar territory, casting her as a Los Angeles makeup artist who trains to fight a Mexican drug cartel after her friend is kidnapped during a trip south of the border. While the casting of Rodriguez as an action star may seem strange, most critics seem to agree it's just about the only thing that ended up going right with Miss Bala. While the rest of this would-be thriller is merely a watered-down, uninspired, and cardboard cutout version of the 2011 film it reimagines. The Galveston Daily News wrote that Miss Bala director Catherine Hardwicke feels more like a director for hire than in her previous films. No doubt partly as a result of all the negative critical buzz, Miss Bala's gross barely broke even with its $15 million budget. In spite of its poor performance critically, a number of critics save space to praise Rodriguez's performance in their reviews. While agreeing that Miss Bala is largely a ho-hum movie, Rolling Stone wrote, "This Hollywoodized remake is mostly generic and uninspired, but it also proves that Rodriguez has the makings of a true movie star. It'll be exciting to see what she does next, so long as it's not a sequel to this." 2019's Hellboy reboot faced an uphill climb from the start, and unfortunately, it didn't even come close to making its way to the top. With a worldwide gross of $21.8 million, the movie failed to make up even half its production budget of $50 million. Hellboy's hype machine got off to a rocky start. Fans' reaction to the release of the film's first trailer was mixed at best, and not even close to what any studio executive would want for a superhero blockbuster. In a sense, however, the reboot's toughest competitors were the two previous Hellboy movies directed by Guillermo del Toro, which starred Ron Perlman. The shadow of Hellboy's predecessor was that much darker for Perlman's very public regrets over he and del Toro's failure to get their own third Hellboy movie. And although he had no evident ill will for the new Hellboy David Harbour, Perlman wasn't shy about his disappointment. Speaking to Collider, he referred to someone else being cast in the role as an open wound. Considering the inherent difficulties in overcoming these challenges, Hellboy would have needed to be very good indeed to establish itself as the basis for a revived franchise. Sadly, it wasn't. The Chicago Tribune warned readers Hellboy's pacing is such that you don't so much watch this movie as submit to being pummeled by it. Meanwhile, Book and Film Globe asked readers to imagine del Toro's movies, except without any spark, wit, fun, tension, and excitement. By all accounts, Hellboy is the kind of bad film that invites a storm of brutal takedowns. So much so that the London Evening Standard's critic wrote that, if he were free to decide, he'd write nothing about the movie and leave this space blank for readers' notes. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy made cinematic history, and even the less well-received Hobbit movies made plenty of money. But there's at least one J.R.R. Tolkien movie out there that didn't make a splash, the one about the man himself. Starring Nicholas Hoult as Tolkien and Lily Collins as Tolkien's future wife Edith Bratt, Tolkien is about the author's early experiences in school, how his life was rocked by the outbreak of World War I, and how all those experiences informed his writing. Tolkien earned an unimpressive $2.2 million on its opening weekend and hasn't gained much ground since. As Forbes' review pointed out, as a biopic without any A-list actors to support it, Tolkien never really stood a chance of making it big at the box office. Unfortunately, the critical response wasn't much better either. Critics tended to think the movie was unimaginative, unoriginal, and boring. For example, Salon's reviewer wrote that Tolkien was doomed by a lack of vision, while the young folks warned that the movie simply couldn't escape the weight of its own tedium. Palms is a comedy about a group of older women in a retirement community who start up a competitive cheerleading squad, and that premise would be difficult enough to pull off at the box office even if the movie hadn't been faced with tremendous competition. But Palms was released the same weekend as Detective Pikachu and another all-female-led comedy, The Hustle. It also faced Avengers Endgame, which was still busy breaking records when Palms was released. Factor in the skew toward an older audience who tend not to show up on opening weekends, and the movie's limping opening weekend gross of $5.6 million isn't that much of a surprise. Regardless of its target demographic or its stiff competition, Palm's failure with critics can't exactly have helped the movie's chances. With an embarrassing Rotten Tomatoes score of 32%, the movie apparently showed off a great cast burdened with lazy writing, with the star power of Diane Keaton and Jackie Weaver being simply not enough to save the movie from box office oblivion. Based on Nicola Yoon's young adult novel of the same name, The Sun Is Also a Star didn't impress critics in the slightest. Reviewer consensus was that the teen drama is poorly written, stretches believability, and is full of cliches. CNN called it half-baked, The Observer called it contrived, while Jackie K. Cooper described it as sappy to the nth degree. If nothing else, even the critics unimpressed by the movie agree that the film's leads likely have a bright future in Hollywood, but even they couldn't save a seriously disappointing script. These reviews likely contributed to the film's lackluster opening weekend of $2.6 million across 2,073 screens. Not only that, but the fact that The Sun Is Also a Star was released the same weekend as the incredibly successful John Wick Chapter 3 may also have contributed to the teen romance's failure.
You wanted me back. I'm back.
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.